Hey guys, just want to start by clarifying that of course in Japan there are some people who speak English very well, but the reality is, and as you know on this channel we like to report on the realities, whether they be things that make us feel good or things that maybe make people feel not so good, but the reality is that when they do English proficiency tests on people all over the world and then compare the results, that Japan ranks very low compared to most of the European countries, compared to most of the Asian countries. So in amongst the people who are speaking English as a second language, Japan ranks extremely low. And of course, it's not the Japanese people's fault individually, because obviously Japanese people work very hard and study very hard and are amongst the most educated people in the world and have very high IQs and are very intelligent people. So obviously that's not the problem. The problem tends to be the system and the way English is approached and taught and used in Japan. So it's a fairly complex problem. People who are English educators would know more about this than we would, but there's a few things that are evident when you live in Japan. One is that English tends to be treated a bit like a hobby by most people, whereas in Europe and a lot of other countries English is treated as being as important as math and the native language that the people are learning, and it's treated as a thing that's important to learn and practice to use. Whereas in Japan, more often than not, it's treated as a bit of a hobby or as a bit of an amusement, and it's quite common for people to tell you that, oh, I studied English for a couple of years and then I gave it up because I was very into badminton at the time. And that's really common, is they'll tell you that they used to study some English but they stopped doing it because they wanted to spend more time doing their other hobbies. You know, I wanted to do more karate, or I wanted to do more badminton, or I wanted to do, you know, so this year I'm studying English. Next year maybe I'll go try badminton, or I'll go try table tennis or something else. So it tends to be treated a bit like that here, unfortunately, or fortunately. I mean, there's two sides to the coin, of course. One of the things that has protected Japanese culture so well is the English level is so low that communicating with the rest of the world is really difficult, which has sort of insulated Japan quite a bit from other cultures, which has good and bad points. One of the good points is that it's insulated Japanese culture and protected it really well, which is good. So the reason that we've made this video is just, it's a bit of a heads up again about the English friendly thing. If you come to Japan, you know, don't expect to be able to use English as you might be able to in Europe or even in other Asian countries. You know, people who've travelled Europe will know that you can get around most of Europe with just English, you know, usually pretty easily, whereas obviously in Japan it's more difficult. It's also interesting the way English is taught here, and if you spend time in Japan, if you're here for a while, you're likely to encounter an English lesson on television or even sometimes on the radio. They'll have it, and again it's sort of an example of, first of all, how English is taught in Japan, but also how English is approached, and also how English is considered to be sort of an entertainment, and television is full of this, examples where somebody, you know, famous people on Japanese TV often throw the occasional English word around just to sort of be cool, and it's sort of the way it's seen. A couple of English words is sort of trendy and cool, same as you've seen on our Japan-glish playlist. That's why we've included this one on our Japan-glish playlist, as well as on our English friendly playlist. So the point of this video was to show you an example from TV of exactly what it's usually like. Now, the things that you'll most commonly notice if you see an English lesson on Japanese TV or on Japanese radio is there's a few things they have in common. One is that usually there's not always, but often there's a foreigner, and the foreigner's job is to perform some English. So the foreigner's job is to actually say some English. But they generally have a role that's a little bit like a clown, and people often talk about this, about ALTs in Japan, assistant language teachers in Japan, having this role as a clown. And it is often the case that they're expected to perform. So perform English, but also perform sort of, I think the idea is to keep the English light and to keep the topic light. So they're generally expected to be fairly clownish. And a lot of ALTs write about this on the internet, talk about this on the internet, how they're forced to behave like performing clowns, which can make some people uncomfortable. And the teacher is almost always, and this is on TV, radio, and often in real life as well, in schools and things, but the teacher is more often than not a middle-aged man who will usually not speak much English at all. Now, he's the English teacher, he's the sensei, and you can see it, particularly on TV, in the layout. So what you'll often have is you'll have a naive Japanese, usually a girl who's probably in her mid-20s, late 20s, maybe 30 years old, who's sort of cute and sort of a bit naive and really like a beginner at English. That's her role, right? And then usually you'll have one foreigner or maybe two foreigners whose role is to be the English performers and who talk to this girl who's playing the part of the Japanese girl who's the student, right? Who doesn't know anything about English. So usually what happens, and as you'll see in a moment, usually what happens is they have a phrase, and usually it's a totally useless phrase. More often than not, it's a totally useless phrase that people might use once or twice in their life, and that teaching it to somebody whose English level is really low is obviously pointless. Now the other thing that you're going to notice straight away is that it's an example of the fact that Japan is one of the few countries in the world that actually teaches a second language in the native language. So in other words, it's one of the few countries in the world that in their lessons they will often teach English in Japanese. And you'll notice in the clip that I'm about to show you is that you will hear the phrase, the English phrase used that they're trying to get across, and I need to focus is the English phrase, okay? I need to focus, or I want to focus, I must focus, or something like that, is the one phrase that they're teaching in this whole lesson, right? And that is the only English used, as you'll notice. The rest of it is all discussed in Japanese. Now, you could be forgiven if you're scanning through your TV channels with a remote control and you stumbled across this English lesson. You probably wouldn't recognize it as such because it's all in Japanese. So, anyway, enough said. So look out for the clown. You'll know which one's the clown. You'll see him, which one the clown is. Look out for the clown. Look out for the sensei, the big sensei sitting behind the desk teaching English in Japanese. And look out, you'll see the other characters we talked about too. So have a look at this.
I need to focus. I need to focus. ですけど、ああいう人の場合は、まあ、話してる人が自分でこうやらなくちゃと思ってる感じが強い。I need to の場合にはもうそういう状況になってる。やらないとまずいね。そういうことなんですよ。それでフォーカスっていうのは集中する、まあ、焦点を合わせるっていう時のフォーカスと同じですね。で集中するっていうのにはコンセントレートっていう単語を聞いたことないですか？そういう単語も、まあ、使うこともできるということで、まあ、余裕があったら覚えてみてあげたい。
そうです、余裕があったら、
はい。で、いかちゃんすごいですね、アウトドア。
すごい、もう
今度は馬ですよね。馬だけにうまくできるのかな。
先生
はい、うまくいったところでドラマをご覧ください。どうぞ。
So there it was. So those of you who have learnt a second language or a third language, those of you who have learnt other languages will know that learning one fairly useless phrase a day, maybe 3 or 4 days a week, learning one useless phrase that is a sort of a rare one that you don't use real often, and being taught that one phrase in a language other than the language that you're studying is obviously not going to do you a lot of good. So the sort of person obviously who would benefit from a phrase like I need to focus would obviously be a person whose English is a fairly good level, and they should be really listening to an English lesson in English, you would think. And I think most of you who've learnt second languages will know, if you've learnt it effectively, you'll know that usually you walk into the classroom and from the moment you walk in till the moment you walk out, it's all in the language that you're learning, of course. That's why you're there. So this video is to sort of show you an example of what you'll see if you spend time in Japan and you watch TV or listen to the radio. You'll come across English lessons like that, and as you can see, they're more about entertainment. They're more about entertainment and amusement than really about learning English, and that's the problem. And that's the problem. It's the way it's approached, and you know, people will actually sit and watch an English lesson like that and think that they've actually benefited in some way from watching it, and obviously they haven't. So it's a bit of a thing. The Japanese government are talking about improving the English level in Japan because they know it's a problem, but they don't really have any solutions. The only solution that they've suggested recently is that they give every person a test, an English test, before they enter university, which obviously is only going to identify the problem. It's not really providing a solution, is it? Giving everybody a test that they're probably going to fail is really, not everybody's going to fail it, of course, but the fact is, you know, and again, I know that this is going to be an unpopular video with some people. Some people will take offense, but it's just the reality of the situation. You know, we see examples of it here on YouTube. Our demographic for our videos about Japan, we have people from all over the world that watch our videos, and you'll often see comments from people that say, oh yeah, we have something like that in Germany, or you know, in Denmark we have something similar to that, or in Holland you'd never see something like that, or and we get comments from people from all over the world, you know, in China and from all over the world we get comments, and everybody discusses these things in English in our comment section, because even though our videos are about Japan, the language of our channel is English, because it's a language that people all over the world can use to learn about Japan. So that's why we've chosen English for this channel. But in our comment section under our videos, the only language that you will usually see other than English is Japanese. And it's because although some of our Japanese subscribers speak English very well and will often leave very good quality English comments on our videos, it's also quite common to have comments left on our videos in Japanese, and it's the only language you'll see on our videos other than English usually. So if you look at the videos that have had big viewerships in Japan, you'll often see this as well. So the ones about the honesty in Japan and things like that attract a lot of Japanese viewers, you'll often see that that's the case. And it's because, you know, and a lot of the people in our lives here too, family and friends, that are well-educated, wonderful, intelligent people, they just can't use English to communicate. It's just not, it's not possible. The few little phrases and sentences and things that they've been taught, and usually the Japanese education system's focused on reading and writing. So quite often they can read and write reasonably well, but as far as communicating in English, it's just not really, they just don't have no practice at it, is basically the bottom line. No practice at communicating in English. You know, the lessons that they've had over the years have been focused on different formats that don't involve communication, which is, for a language, is an unusual situation, isn't it? So we'll be making more videos about this topic. There is a few other subjects we want to talk about that we think we need to talk about these, because people who are interested in Japan are entitled to hear all about what goes on in Japan, and people who will be visiting Japan, it's important for those people to know what to expect. So, and for some people this is just mildly interesting as well, but we, as with all our topics, we try to cover topics that will help inform people. So there'll be more of these coming. So more videos coming soon.